Thank you so much, Kola, for coming on Backstories. It's so great to talk to you today, and I've been looking forward to this for a very long time now. So I appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me. Delighted.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I was doing some research on you, and I found an interesting full circle moment. Right, your dad is a serial entrepreneur, just like you are. Owns a cattle farm, right? Owns a printing business, and also
Actually owned.
owned a printing business, and then also owned a finance company that
Correct.
funded businesses,
Correct. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And you being the first son,
Correct.
obviously wanted you to take over the family business,
Correct.
but as first sons do, or as first kids do, rebelled and decided, I'm going to go do my own thing.
Yeah.
And then you go ahead to start Ventures Platform, which is your VC firm, aka a finance company that funds businesses.
Mm.
One of those businesses, Printivo, which is a printing company,
Correct. Correct.
Thrive Agric,
Yeah.
which is an agricultural business,
Yeah.
right? So you said no to that, but still went ahead to still be a part of those businesses in your own way. Does he, your dad, does he appreciate the irony?
Yeah. Look, Fatu, great question. I think it's one of the interesting things about life is, we think we want to be our own person, but ultimately we are products of socialization,
Hmm.
and as much as I really, when I was younger, I really wanted to sort of dance to the tune of my own music. I had been experiencing all of these things in what I call a startup foundry, which was my family home, and they left sort of imprint in me.
Hmm.
And today when my dad and I talk, and we're best of friends, is probably my biggest cheerleader today. He's amazed at how my journey mirrors his journey, and even though I ended up going about it in my own way, I always say I'm essentially doing probably newer and different versions of what he did,
Hmm.
and I, as they say, the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree, right?
Hmm.
But I think that whole concept of self-actualization
Yeah.
and really, charting your own course
Hmm.
was really important to me as a young man. But alas, it's not too far away from
Yeah.
from where I came. Yeah.
But at the time when he was talking to you about taking over the family business
Yeah.
and you were saying, I want to go do my own thing, like what was that period like? Was there friction between you two?
Friction is an understatement.
Hmm.
I mean, to be very honest, it didn't start out with friction, right? I've always been a person that takes duty very seriously.
Hmm.
I was raised in a Yoruba family. I'm Yoruba by
Hmm.
culture, and if you know anything about the Yoruba culture, the firstborn always tends to carry a sense of responsibility. And so at the time my dad sort of told me he wanted to retire and wanted me to join the family business, I was in the US
Yeah.
and I was working in corporate finance. I was actually just gonna go to law school to do corporate law. My dream was to end up on Wall Street doing M&As. And one phone call was all it took. I packed my stuff. I remember shipping all my stuff back to Nigeria, and the first set of boxes that arrived were crates of records and some
Like
art
vinyl records.
vinyl
Okay.
records. And my mom called me, sure, okay, Sha, like, that's your buffer, you all right?
Yeah.
Because people come back and they send
Yes.
cars, you're
Yeah,
sending
yeah,
boxes of
yeah. Yeah.
records,
Yeah.
you know. But the point is, I actually didn't hesitate.
Hmm.
I was at the time very willing to sacrifice my ambitions
Hmm.
for the greater good
Hmm.
or the legacy of the family. But I think in coming out again, I was very young, and in
Hmm.
retrospect, I realized that I might have been a little too restless,
Hmm.
and I was still young. My when I came in, my thinking was I could actually um, implement some of the things I'd learned in business school
Yeah.
and experience in the US. And I really wanted to sort of transform the business to become a digital first business. And that's where the tensions kind of
Hmm.
came about because, my dad had built this really large, successful printing business at the time, was the largest publishing business in the
Hmm.
northern part of Nigeria. And, they had done things a certain way. And so we would have this very, very fundamental disagreements. And I probably was a bit too impatient to
Yeah.
listen and at some point, about a year and a half or 2 years in, it just became a really unhealthy situation. And and I kind of just made a call that, look, what do I value most,
Mm-hmm.
the sanctity of my family,
Mm-hmm.
or working in this business.
Mm-hmm.
And I elected to move on. It was a very tough conversation to have. I wasn't my dad and I didn't speak for some time. He was clearly wasn't happy.
Yeah.
um but in retrospect, it was the best decision I ever
Mm-hmm.
made, right? Because it forced me to really reflect on who I was and what I wanted to become, what I wanted to invest my life in doing.
Yeah.
And it put me on the path of purpose and really
Mm-hmm.
figuring out what my life was about. And so yes, it was very difficult.
Yeah.
I also was fortunate that it made me move to Nigeria, and I met my wife at the
Mm-hmm.
time,
Okay.
who's been a pillar of support for
Yeah.
everything I've done.
Yeah.
I probably wouldn't have, well, who knows, maybe I would have still met her, but
Yeah.
it was definitely a challenging period, but it was also catalytic to
Yeah.
to to helping me achieve whatever it is that I've achieved today.
Yeah. And I mean, you still did try, right? You answered the call, you came back,
I
you
I
you you
I
put some
did
years
the I
in.
did the right thing
Yeah.
as a firstborn Yoruba
Yeah.
son.
Yeah.
I put my years in.
Mm-hmm.
I made my mark.
Mm-hmm.
It actually also helped me do my first exit, because on the side I also started a business called Budget Top 25. It was essentially a tourism guide for, yes, yeah,
That was you?
that was me.
No
So this was
way.
in 2009. We had this kiosk all around the
I knew
city.
it.
It was a
Yes.
free guide. We actually
Yes.
got acquisition offers from some international
That is
publishers.
very
Yeah,
interesting.
so that was, and when I was moving back, because what had happened was when I left the business, I
Mm-hmm.
then relocated back to the US and
Okay.
sold
Mm.
that business. And so that became my first exit.
Oh wow.
And really opened my eyes to the possibility of building something
Mm-hmm.
from zero to
Yeah.
one, and extracting value from
Mm-hmm.
equity.
Yeah.
So there were so many things that happened in that period that were catalytic for
Mm-hmm.
my journey today.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I grew up in Abuja, moved there with my family in '93 when Abuja became the capital.
Yeah,
And around that time, Abuja, I mean, it's not what it is right now, right? It
absolutely.
was a much quieter place. To find places to go or
Yeah,
to even find activities,
yeah.
especially for the age I was at the time, was quite difficult, right? So Abuja Guide was kind of like a thing that
It,
you sat with
it,
your friends to try to figure out what to do,
it,
where to go, and
it was the in thing. And it was crazy. Like I was publisher, I was editor.
that is so
I was
interesting.
yeah, and it became successful. Quite quickly. We ended up also launching an online version.
Mhm.
And so when I tell people that, look, I've done several things.
Mhm.
I've sold. I once had a construction business that sold construction materials. I
Mhm.
did Top 25, the city guide. I've done real estate,
Mhm.
and I think that sort of duplicity of
Yeah.
experiences, helps my range of sort of interventions when I'm working with a company
Yeah.
or looking to invest in a company, and I wouldn't have it any other way.
You've also been quite vocal about an accident you had when you
Yeah,
were much younger, 13 years old,
yeah,
if I'm right. And you said that affected, your memory,
yeah,
right? So there's parts of your past that you don't really remember.
yeah.
Did that have an impact on you? Are there parts of that part of your life that you wish you remember? Like how has
Mm,
that
mm,
singular thing impacted your life
yeah.
today?
Well, besides the fact that it causes embarrassment from time to time, because I run into people that expect me to know them, and I just don't remember, because they're caught up in that part of my life that's where my memory is very, very fleeting and faint and patchy. um but on the balance of scale, there's lots of positives, and by my nature, I tend to want to focus on the positives I can take out of any experience, whether negative or positive. And there's two things that stand out to me. So one is, it's definitely sort of reduced my loss aversion,
Okay.
in that I'm actually very okay with losing out of failure, because I tend to forget anyway, right?
Mhm.
So I tend to get up and go,
Mhm.
and it's like I'm like the cat that has nine lives,
Mhm.
because I don't dwell on failure as much.
Yeah.
But it also means that I forgive quite easily, right?
Okay.
I let go very easily.
Mhm.
And that's a powerful tool for if you're going to do venture,
Mhm.
the ability to not dwell on on the failures or the setbacks, but focus on figuring out a way forward.
Yeah.
The ability to sort of back a founder and watch and see the business fail,
Yeah.
but then back them again because the founder fundamentally showed the right qualities. And even if that sort of a company didn't work out, in venture capital, we're focused on optimizing for the upside as opposed to trying to protect the downside.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean you don't put protections in place or you don't try to mitigate risk. But for me, that incident has like become a superpower that enables me to just keep venturing, and I wouldn't have it any other way.
I've had conversations with founders before where I say, I would really love to see us have, a company that gets to be as successful as the Flutterwaves, the
Correct.
Paystacks, right? And most of the capital that goes on in there is from just local
Local
players,
sources.
right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily even only have to be from Nigeria, but also other parts of the continent,
Correct.
not necessarily having external people put money in it.
Correct.
And then, they say things like, well, what does it matter? Capital is capital. If people are very happy to put money in there, then, it doesn't
So
really matter.
so capital is capital, but what people miss is capital with context is actually very important, right? Capital that is local,
Yeah.
because look, ultimately, if you're building a company in a regulated space, it's important to have capital that understands the landscape, capital that you can actually pick up your phone and call
Yeah.
when there's a regulatory challenge. And that's what we, as Ventures Platform, that's what we sort of hope to bring to the table with the companies that we back.
Yeah.
Because we have probably one of the most significant representations of local LPs and
Yeah.
capital sources, it's actually very catalytic for our portfolio companies because we have a network of people we can engage with, whether it be for partnerships or for regulatory issues. But also for me, venture capital is really not just about making money. For
Yeah.
me, it's really about national development and improving our country. And so having local capital be a part of that transformation is just a great icing on the cake.
I feel like the last 3 years, a lot more startups now are getting very serious about engaging governments and trying to figure out regulation and even like co-writing or co-drafting policies with government partners, right?
Correct.
Meanwhile, let's say 5 years ago, most people just a lot of founders still fight with governments on Twitter,
Absolutely.
but now it's more subtle
Yeah.
because they understand that if you're going to get to a certain stage, we're going to get as big as you think you'll
That's
get
right.
to. You need to engage with governments. You
Absolutely.
need to be very aware of what the regulators are doing. So you need to also hire people on your team who understand policy.
That's right.
Or if you don't want that, then you can maybe get like a policy consultant or something. But just understanding that you can't do this separately.
That's right.
The startup bill seems like a big win on paper.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of celebration around it. But some people don't really understand what the impacts would be to the ecosystem or to startups.
Yeah.
Like how it's going to solve for overregulation, for example, which is something that is an existential crisis in
Yeah.
Nigeria, right?
Correct.
So, like, what do you think this bill does for startups?
Yeah, fantastic. So first off, I would say there was an ecosystem effort. I
Yeah.
mean, we definitely played a role, a key role, and I'm proud that we did. But what we did that was really brilliant was we came together as a collective of ecosystem operators to collaborate with governments, and we passed a bill into law in record time.
Yeah.
I mean, this bill was essentially done in about 12 months. That's
Yes.
unprecedented. I think beyond the bill itself, which I will talk about in a minute, I think we have to study the process of bringing the bill about, because I think it serves as a template for what's possible when young people and professionals in any industry collaborate with governments.
Yeah.
Now, to the bill itself. Now, we have the bill is now law. It's been passed into law. But the next phase is now implementation.
Yes.
But there's a lot of good in that bill. So first of all, the bill actually provides incentives for startups and their investors. So early stage companies, as long as they're labeled and registered, can get tax breaks for the first couple of years.
Yes.
And that's significant, right? There's also incentives for investors, essentially saying, look, if you invest in a company that is labeled as a startup, through a portal that this bill creates, a certain percentage of your investment can become a capital gains rebate or write-off, whatever word you want to use. And that is significant because if you look at ecosystems like the UK, for instance, in policies like that have actually catalyzed early stage investments
Yes.
for the ecosystem. And so that is something that we would see happen in Nigeria as well. You also have a mechanism that we hope would actually increase the number of companies that are domiciled in Nigeria. As you know, today, startups often have to re-domicile
Yes.
outside the country, robbing Nigeria of lots of benefits. But this bill actually sets the stage for making it feasible to domicile your company in Nigeria, both from the investor's perspective and from the founder's perspective. Now, let's not talk about the provisions for actually government setting up a fund of funds to invest in funds and startups as well through instruments like the NSIA. So again, looking at NSIA's involvement in our fund,
Yes.
we expect this bill would actually catalyze significant more investment because there's actually a provision that every year government should set aside a certain amount to invest in funds and startups. And so there's so much in this bill that if people just took their time to read it, you realize that it's a significant win for our ecosystem. Now, Nigeria is not the only country that has passed a similar bill. But independently, the Nigerian Startup Act has been adjudged as the best act on the continent.
Yes.
And so I think we all should be really proud of it. And I couldn't be prouder of the
Yes.
team that worked on this
Yeah.
with us.
I agree. And what parts of the bill excite you the most?
I am most excited about the mechanisms in the bill that would enable more locally domiciled companies.
Yeah.
Again, I'm a nationalist. As much as I'm a capitalist, I also care about the country and what happens and the impact of the wealth creation that we're working on the country Nigeria itself. And so that's important for me, that we can fly the Nigerian flag as we do venture capital.
Yes.
And so that portion of the bill that really lays the foundation for that is the most exciting for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's talk about money, right?
Sure.
So Paystack exits in 2020 when Stripe acquired Paystack, right? It was one of the most, I mean, everyone was excited about it, especially because it happened on the back of NSAS, right? When we're doing all of the protests. So it was so beautiful for us to see that kind of story come out at a time when young people were literally fighting for their lives, right? And we're saying, okay, look at the value that we bring,
Correct.
right? And on the other side of it, that exit made people rich, right? It was one of it actually helped a lot of funds, like yours, for example, right? So if you wouldn't mind telling me, how much did you guys make from from that deal, and how did it feel when it landed in your bank accounts?
Well, I'll tell you what.
Yes.
I'm not complaining at all.
Okay.
And I was just talking to Shola actually before this interview on something else. And look, Shola is an incredible guy, and Shola and Ezra and the Paystack team built an incredible company.
Yes, they
And,
did.
you know, I remember in 2018 when I was fundraising at the time for Ventures Platform. I traveled all over the world. And the question I would always get is, where are the exits?
Yes.
You know, and so I came back to Nigeria and I said, look, now we need to focus on on exits, and fast forward to 2020, the Paystack exit happened. Look, I never had doubts that Paystack would be a successful company. I knew from the day I met Shola and wired the check, I knew it would be a successful company. But to see that exit happen when it happened, we were working on it for a couple of months. It wasn't all roses. And again, you point out that it happened amidst the NSAS unfortunate situation, which I think is a highlight of what is possible when youth come together. To see that exit happen around that time was for me, I think, a significant reflection of the power of the Nigerian youth.
I agree.
Fast forward in 2020, the founders Shola and Ezra get national honors.
Yes.
And so I think, look, if anything good is going to come out of Nigeria, and I believe it will, it would be as a consequence of the Nigerian youth.
Yes.
And I think this ecosystem plays a critical role. We're grateful that that exit happened. Several exits later, as Ventures Platform, we are now able to look at global investors to say, yes, exits can come out of this market, and we expect to see a lot more exits. And we continue to say kudos to Shola and the team for ensuring that we don't go back home in shame to say where the
Yes.
result of all of this investing.
Yes. Yes.
It was a transformative exit. Yeah.
Okay. So how transformative was it to your bank account?
Well, let's just say it was a nice, it was really nice to have. It was really nice to have, because you know what, investing is such a, like I said earlier, you in quotes, you pay your school fees, you know, because you're
Yes.
gonna do several investments that wouldn't necessarily work out. But the Paystack exit was catalytic for us. It showed that we can not only have paper returns, but that we can return money. Again, several of the initial investments that we made were funded by, you know, by me.
Yeah.
And so it was great to sort of have that outcome. I mean, like, save for showing you my bank statements, we're quite happy that it happened when it did.
Okay. So speaking of, every other thing that's been happening in the ecosystem recently, especially this year, I feel like this year has been a year of reckoning for startups, not just in Nigeria, but around the world. But some of the stories that came out of Nigeria this year was
Yep.
mostly about like governance, company culture, right? A lot of stories about about founders and the way they were treating their employees, or even just finding out that most of them didn't have boards, and the companies were just run the way the founder saw fit, right? And I remember a couple of times when some of this news broke, I'm like, Kola, how are you holding up? Because Ventures Platform backs some of these
Companies, yeah.
startups, right? So I can imagine that it's a lot of headache to deal with. How are you assessing culture, governance, to
Yeah.
make sure that some of these stories
Yeah.
don't keep coming out?
Look, I think when you invest at scale like we do today, we've invested in over 100 companies between my personal angel portfolio and the ventures portfolio. Clearly, you know, probably about 110 investments now. You're going to have some companies that will be problematic. I mean, it's just probability, right? Um, but that doesn't mean we are not taking governance or due diligence seriously. As far back as 2016, when we started Ventures Platform, one of the modules we had in our accelerator program at the time was actually governance. And I remember very vividly in that module, it was a taught module in class. Some of the companies, I won't name them, would fall asleep when we were talking about governance and boards.
Did I get in trouble?
Wait. Because the document was on Dropbox, I remember like 2 years later, we'll get a notification that so and so has just downloaded this slide, because the problems have started to materialize.
Yeah.
You know, and so we've always fundamentally believed in due diligence, in
Yes.
governance, even when it wasn't cool,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not new. I think what the reality is, the world over, early stage companies tend to have don't tend to have formal boards, because at that point literally are moving fast and
Mm-hmm.
you will break things.
Yes.
That, however, that doesn't mean you throw away all of the controls that are required in building a company.
Mm-hmm.
And so we continue to hold our founders accountable.
Mm-hmm.
We expect that founders will report regularly. We expect that founders would do annual audits. We
Mm-hmm.
expect that as companies get to a certain stage, formal boards will be
Mm-hmm.
formed with independent members.
Mm-hmm.
We expect that we will do due diligence. We
Yeah.
would ask for data rooms. I remember in 2019, 2020, we would ask companies for data rooms, and they would look at us like, what's a data room? Well, we have to do our diligence,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and I think as an investing community, um, and thankfully there's some efforts. In fact, very recently, a number of us investors have come together to really
Mm-hmm.
work on, and review what changes need to happen across the industry.
The ventures platform was very instrumental in the survival of Thrive Agric. And of course, Thrive Agric is an agribusiness, and that was actually one of the industries that got really hit by the pandemic, right? Because farmers couldn't go to their farms, so there were no harvests. And with this situation, investors
Yeah,
got really, really antsy.
yeah,
They got impatient
correct,
because their monies were not coming at the
correct,
time that it said it was going to come,
correct,
right? So, and as we're young investors, where do they go to vent?
correct.
Social
Yeah,
media.
yeah,
So Fiverr Agri got
yeah,
dragged
yeah,
on Twitter,
yeah.
right? So one of the things that
Mm,
I know happened was, you guys stepped in,
yeah,
brought in current CMO of MTN,
correct.
Adia,
Yeah,
to take over,
yeah.
turn it around. And then, after a while, you're getting like all these great testimonials about, the fact that, okay, money is not landing in people's accounts, right? But that was not the same story
Mm.
for a lot of
Several
the
others. Yeah,
other
yeah.
agribusinesses, right? Some of them had to fold, some of them are being dragged in courts as well. So what do you think was the
Yeah.
secret ingredient here that made Thrive Agri survive and
Mhm.
others fail, essentially?
Yeah, look, I think it was a number of things. For me, the Thrive Agric situation was very personal.
Why was
We
it personal?
was personal on a number of levels. First off, we were the first investors in Thrive Agric. I remember meeting Uka and I, the founders. They were young, really, really excited guys. They graduated from Covenant University. We supported them in putting the company together. And because I believed so passionately in what they were doing, anytime I gave a talk or a speech, I would talk about Thrive Agri.
I'm aware.
And I remember when that thing happened, I got so many calls and DMs. And one of the most touching ones was from a young gentleman who told me he had put money in Thrive because he was going to go to university in the UK or somewhere,
Mhm.
and now he's lost all his money. Now, what do you tell such a person?
Yes.
you know and so there were those personal stories, but for us as well, we knew that the founders had not done anything untoward. It wasn't
Hmm.
like there was fraud, or
Hmm.
they weren't living extravagant lives.
Hmm.
So it was really a function of a business that had grown really fast, um, and had been hit by this pandemic,
Yeah.
by a set of unfortunate
Yeah.
circumstances. And so the moment we determined that there was no fraud
Hmm.
involved, uh, then we sort of, and then there were the personal stories. We felt a need to step in, right? And I think to credit the founders, they were also very open to help, because it's one
Hmm.
thing to want to help a founder, it's another thing for the founder to be accepting, or to
Hmm.
accept that help,
Yes.
right? And to be to realize the limitations that they have, and so that definitely helped as well. And so very quickly, the first thing we realized was, look, there's a need for some help here. We need
Hmm.
to get an experienced operator that is able to sort of pull all the pieces together, and calm the waters. An idea was the perfect. I mean, I remember it was a 2-hour conversation we had on the phone, trying to dissect the situation with some of our other partners and board members, and convince her to join. And she then accepted to join. And there were a number of things that we put in place very quickly. So first of all was transparent communication with
Hmm.
all the stakeholders, including the subscribed investors, to say, look, this is the situation. Everyone is going to get paid, but it's going to take time.
Hmm.
And so the company stepped up communication, and that helped significantly to instill confidence. But also because the company had actually sort of, they had outstanding sort of yield on
Hmm.
farms to call on. And so it took time, but we were able to sort of inject fresh debt capital in the company, restructure some of the obligations, and also step up communication. And
Hmm.
today, the company is faring significantly better. Yeah.
So why was Adia the obvious choice when you thought, okay, these folks are in trouble,
Yeah.
we need someone to come here and turn things around? Why was she the person that you thought,
Well,
I'm going to call
well,
her?
first of all, she was a woman. Well, look,
Okay.
look. I think the
Okay.
point here is that we find. I generally think that women are great in crisis situations.
Yes.
Just that ability
Yes.
to calmly assess the
Yeah.
situation and
100%.
take charge,
100%.
is something that Adia definitely.
Hmm.
From my interactions with her, we were convinced that she would, but also she had experience dealing with complex operations, having a background as an engineer. She had worked in Migo. I'd engaged with her, and we were very confident that she had the experiences required, but also we wanted a very clear communicator,
Okay.
someone that understood the power of clarity of thoughts and being able to sort of pass your ideas on to other people. And then finally, we needed someone that had a good grasp of numbers, because Thrive had grown so quickly that it was partly an agric operation, but was largely a finance operation. And finally, we needed someone that could optimize for speed,
Yeah.
because speed was of essence, and I think Adia just brought the sum total of those of skills together.
We've heard all the great stories about your fantastic exits and, popping champagne bottles when the Stripe acquired Paystack. So what deals have gotten you burnt? I'm sure, you invest at scale. There must be a couple of them that have just like, made you feel, okay, this is my villain story. This is why, if I'm going to be investing, I will look deeper into this company or this founder. So
Yeah.
what deals have gotten you burnt?
Yeah, so first off, we don't spray and pray.
Okay.
We again, because we're multi-stage now, we're being more disciplined. But I guess I'm not going to name any company,
Yeah, you don't
but
have to.
consistently, every time I have flouted my rule of not backing jerks, or founders who I don't consider to be, who don't strike me as very nice, it's always blown up, right? And so, and that's a fundamental rule for me. Like, we want to back founders who are decent people, who treat their co-founders and employees decently, who are respectful. Because to be honest, it ultimately bubbles to the top, right?
I think it's a great lesson to learn. So did they like take your money and run? Is that why you thought, okay, I'm not doing this anymore?
Well, they didn't actually take our money and run, but they just didn't execute as well as
Yes.
they probably could have. Yeah.
Okay.
And so things like that happen. Yeah.
Okay. So one of the things that we have in common is
Yeah.
collecting arts.
Yes, yes.
I feel like it's the single most soul shifting thing that I
Yeah,
do.
yeah.
I enjoy it a lot because art is the expression of an artist's soul, right?
Correct.
So what is okay, if you had to name two artists who are your absolute favorite artists,
Wow.
who would they be?
I don't want to cause a civil war because I love all my artists and artist friends. So look, I collect artists from around the world and around the continent. Two artists who I really enjoy, and who I'm great friends with, I guess would be Victor Ikamano is
Yes.
one of my favorite artists.
Yeah.
And another one would be Modupe
I
Fatu.
knew you were going to say partner.
I just, the authenticity of their style, the
Yes.
strength of their voice,
Yes.
and the power of their message
Yeah.
resonates with me.
Yeah.
And my family, my wife and I are really proud to have their works in our collection,
Yeah.
and show them in our spaces.
Yeah, I really love Modupe's work, and especially when you say the power of the message. I love her swim series. I think that was just phenomenal.
That whole message of representation,
Yeah.
it's really empowering, particularly for young women of color.
Yes.
I find, or we want young Black women,
Yes.
to be more precise.
Yeah.
I find that to be really important in today's day and
Yeah.
age. And there's so many layers to what she's what the messages she
Yeah.
passes through her
Yeah.
works. And if you spend time with Modupe, the thoughtfulness and just how deliberate she is, for
Yeah.
me, is deserving of respect.
Yeah. And she won an Emmy for the documentary,
She
right?
won an Emmy for the
That was
documentary,
incredible.
and actually the central work in that
Yeah.
Emmy, 1982 or 1988, is actually in our collection. Is of the subject of that work is 100 years old. She's 100-year-old synchronized swimmer.
Oh, wow.
And it's a beautiful, beautiful piece that
I would love to see it for sure.
yeah, happy to show you.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
sure.
Okay, so I'm experimenting with a new kind of quick fire.
Sure.
So it's like really quick questions. But this time around, I decided to ask two of your friends to send in questions for you.
Oh boy.
Right? One of them is nice and it's like, oh yeah, very serious. And then the other one is it's a little bit dangerous. So,
Sure.
based on your answers.
Sure.
So the first one is from Olumide Shoyombo, who's also a venture
Sure.
capitalist,
Yeah.
runs Voltron Capital.
Sure.
And he asked, what's your favorite investor quote?
Oh, there's a couple, but the one that he and I say a lot is a bird in hand is the only bird. I will say that a lot when we're considering exit.
Okay.
Do we take this exit now or do we wait? And so very much, I mean, and what I end up doing recently is we tend to take secondary exits, partials.
Okay.
So you can at least sort of
Yes.
but in venture, that often that can be viewed as an error because when you take an exit too early, you can really miss out on the alpha down the road. But in this market, a bird in hand is the only bird.
Okay. And then the second one is from Akinoyemode, who's also one of my favorite people. And then he asks, well, I've heard rumors about your use of burner accounts. So his question is, what is the most mischievous thing you have used a burner account for, and where was it most useful? So was it on Twitter and IG or Snapchat? And I feel like there's context here for that because it sounds very specific.
So, good question. So first off, I don't have a burner account on Twitter.
Okay.
I don't need one.
Okay.
But I have had a burner account on IG.
Okay.
Right. Because I think it's important to sort of follow what's happening
Without revealing yourself.
without being spotted. And look, I don't spend a lot of time on social media.
Caveats.
But hey, you gotta have your burner.
Okay.
You gotta have your burner. So I'll keep it at that.
Have you done things? Have you slid into anybody's DMs?
Nah, I don't.
Have you instigated people?
DMs can be very risky, so I tend to stay out of the DMs.
Okay. Okay. And then
that's a very wicked question.
And then my own question, and this is the last question, is: do you Google yourself? And what's the craziest thing you found on Google that you're just like, come on now?
So I don't Google myself, but my daughter, I don't know what she was looking for. I've got a teen.
How old is she?
13.
Okay.
And one day she sends me a screenshot, Kola Aina's, and and the first thing that was Kola Aina's wife.
Yes.
She said, "Daddy, people are looking for mommy." And it was this huge thing, my wife is an incredible woman, and she's just been a great pillar of support.
Yeah.
And I guess my daughter was traumatized that people were trying to find out who my wife was.
And it's like Kola Aina wife, Kola Aina net worth, Kola Aina married.
It's like
very,
very specific questions.
Yeah, people want to know.
Yeah, it's well, look, I think it's what it is. It comes with the territory, and let's just hope that we continue to do good work.
Yes. Yeah. Kola, this has been amazing. It's been
incredible.
So much fun. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming, and it was just beautiful to talk to you.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed the chat and looking forward to more engagement.
All right, for sure.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's a wrap.
Man, we didn't have to do any double takes.